Hey everyone, it's Alora, and today I'm going to be doing a review on My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. Might be Elena Ferrante, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce this name in Italian. This book is the first in a series called the Neapolitan series. Essentially, this book, which was translated out of Italian, is the story of this friendship between two women. Now, the prologue begins when the two main characters are around 60 years old. Our protagonist, Elena, receives a phone call that her oldest friend has gone missing and has deliberately erased all traces of her existence. So in order to counteract this void that her friend Lila has left, Elena decides to write about their friendship, and that is where the real story begins. This first book in the series follows the two girls in childhood through adolescence, and then each subsequent book follows them later and later in life. Overall, I gave this story a 4-star rating, but I want to explain that because I have a really hard time with star ratings because I feel like there can be so many different factors that play into whether or not I enjoyed a book and whether or not I thought that it was a good piece of literature. So the very best part of the book was the incredible depiction of the complex nature of relationships. Elena simultaneously loved, looked up to, was jealous of, and tried to outdo her best friend Lila. Peripherally, we were also exposed to Lila's suffering. Even though Elena may not have fully understood it, we could still see it as the third-party observer. The author also did a really nice job showing the transition, the sometimes rocky transition from childhood to adolescence, so I really appreciated that. Characterization, on point. She had very clear distinctions between the two girls. Sometimes some of the young men, the differences between the young men was a little bit blurry. To me, I couldn't quite differentiate. There are so many characters in this book, and actually at the beginning of the book, the author provides this really handy little section called the Index of Characters, where it basically gives you all of the family names as headings and then all of the characters underneath with all of their subnames and their nicknames and things like that. And so that was actually, it was really intimidating when I first opened the book and saw this, but then it was very helpful while reading, especially at the beginning before I became more familiar with the characters. Also, I want to point out that it was really great to see another cultural perspective. So this book is based in this kind of impoverished neighborhood in Naples. So there was a lot of poverty, there was very little emphasis placed on education, especially for girls. Girls were not expected to work or learn a trade, they were expected to just marry and have children and raise those children. The preponderance of violence is what really got me. There was physical abuse and verbal abuse, and it just was everywhere in this story. So many characters were abusive to one another, but the thing was that it was culturally normalized. It wasn't out of character for the people in this story, and everybody seemed to be used to it, which was kind of disturbing to me coming from my background, but it was really fascinating to see this other perspective where that was actually the norm. Also, it was interesting to see how Elena perceived the world to be so small. She thought even excursions to another part of Naples was a really big deal, and it was for her character. I also want to point out that some of the sentences were incredibly poignant and profound, and it really makes me curious how the words were arranged in the original language and how the translation affected the flow of the story. That's something that's very fascinating to me when thinking about translations, because not only does a translator have to translate the actual words into another language, but they also have to transmit the meaning, make sure that it stays the same across both languages. But in addition to that, there's also the flow, and sometimes I wonder if the original tone of a story, snowmobile, if the original tone of a story is maintained. So now I want to talk about the negative aspects of the story and why I gave it a 4-star instead of a 5-star rating. Essentially, this book was very slow, and the reason for that is because it's mainly about characterization and character development as opposed to being a plot-driven story. So some parts definitely dragged for me. It was hard for me to get into it. Like I said, there were a lot of characters, and so I was constantly in my mind trying to remember who was who and which families were feuding with which other families and who was interested in dating who. It got very confusing, but it was slow, and so that hampered my overall enjoyment of the story. By the time I got halfway into it or so, I was much more used to the pace of the story, and so I was fine with it, but right at first it took me a bit to get into it. Anyway, overall, I definitely thought it was worth a read. I would recommend it to a lot of people, not to everyone. It really depends what kind of stories you like to read. If you're into adult fiction and you're okay with a slower plot that's more character-based, I think you would definitely enjoy this. If you are interested in seeing other cultural perspectives, I would recommend this book. If you're interested in translated works, this is a great one. So overall, there are a lot of positives, and I would recommend it to a lot of people. If this sounds interesting to you, definitely check it out. So that's all that I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this short review, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy. Bye, guys.